I'm not going to begin again. But I will say one more time, these words of encouragement by Paul, I hear like this: you are a love letter from God. What would that be like to embrace our stories as a love letter from God? Hearing stories, telling stories, creating stories is an ancient practice. We rely on storytelling to bring forward the faraway teachings of Jesus into this moment and all the moments of our story. There are no transcripts of what Jesus said and who was present. No sketch artist exists to capture the crowd or the expressions on the disciples' faces. Faith-based storytelling was and is our link to the holy. Not the holy of what was, but the holy of what is. Oh, I'm up on the thing. I'm not going to look over there again. The danger in storytelling is that stories don't have to be true. They only have to be believed. I'm going to repeat that. The danger in storytelling is that stories don't have to be true, only believed. Our bodies absorb stories involuntarily. Our bodies remember stories. Our bodies respond to the stories it holds. And by design, our sensations of sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste can trigger vivid memory recall. Have you ever experienced that? My mother wears a distinct perfume, Estee Lauder Youth Dew. And anytime, anywhere, anything that's going on, I know that scent instantly. The song that we started with this morning, the second song, my body has a reaction to. I'm not familiar, I'll admit, with the artist that we're using today, not all that familiar, but that song brings something forward for me. For those of us who carry trauma in our bodies, and I'm more and more inclined to believe that includes all of us, some stories play on repeat until we have an opportunity to metabolize and process and heal. The impact of the stories our body carries is profound. And having a safe space to heal is critical. At the beginning of worship, we say, at St. Paul's, we seek to follow the example of Jesus's radical love, reaching out in openness and affirmation to seekers, believers, and doubters, to all who come looking for God and community. At St. Paul's, we are not called to change people. We are called to offer a place where growth can take place. Earlier in Lent, we talked about how we are the church. We are the body of the church. We need a safe space to change the narratives that can be so destructive to our relationships. How we relate to God, to each other, and ourselves are impaired by the false narratives of trauma and abuse. Storytelling is healing. In our culture, we are so uncomfortable with grief and loss, people not knowing what to say, often saying the most unhelpful things to ease their discomfort of someone else's sorrow. Or maybe even worse, we say nothing at all. We avoid mentioning the person who has passed or the event that was so hard. We don't want to upset someone. I don't believe that sorrow is meant to be changed or fixed, just held. Recently, after my uncle's passing, the hospice nurse encouraged my family to gather and tell stories about my uncle. She said that after the loss of a loved one, healing can be aided through storytelling. And taking her advice, it was my experience that this was true. Laughter, tears, secrets revealed, perspectives that were shared had an effect of bringing real joy and comfort in a time of sorrow. Our bodies respond to the stories we tell it. Self-talk reinforces the stories stored in our body. And I wonder this morning, is it possible to change that narrative? What is the story I tell my body? What are the stories I hold in my body? And what does that story feel like? Is that story due for an edit? What if someone proofread the story I tell myself? In AA, we have a mentor-like relationship with somebody that we call a sponsor. And one purpose of that relationship is to unpack our stories. Looking for false narratives and roles that we have assigned ourselves. Sometimes in our story, we play the victim over and over and over. Sometimes in our story, we play the hero. Oh, how I love my tattered cape. Other times, we are the villain. I'm curious where grace and mercy and loving kindness and tenderness, if God or Jesus was the editor of the stories I tell myself, how would that change my everything? Victim, hero, villain. We're all those things. But again, our stories are not written in stone. They're not even written in ink. And with the help of our loving Creator, we can revisit these old ideas with a more balanced perspective, knowing and trusting that our stories are written with love, mercy, and grace of the living Spirit of God. I'd like to invite us again, as we did last week, to think about some questions. And I've talked about the heavy stories, really, that, grief and trauma and loss. But those are just the heavy stories. We can share light stories too. Again, we're not asking anyone to overexpose any tender places, but just to share for a moment with one another. What are the stories you tell yourself? If you guys could turn in little groups of folks, we'll just spend a few moments telling a story or two. Today, I want to say how inspired I am watching you tell one another your stories, and what an honor it is to tell some of my story in a loving, safe place. We are meaning makers. We cannot choose or change the beginning or middle of our stories, but with God's help, we do have influence, choice, and freedom in the stories we tell ourselves and each other today and going forward. My story, your story, our story is not over. The story of St. Paul's is not over. We are the co-creators of story. May this safe space remain a place where growth and healing can take place, not just for those among us today, but also for those in need of us as the story unfolds. We all play a role in the story of this body. Let us stand in it and know we are worthy. Amen. During the sharing, I just want to say one more thing. During the sharing, and there's a couple of pieces that I found when I was looking for material about story, and I just thought this was so incredible. It's an art. It's a, the one before that, sorry. It is a way of placing ourselves in God's story among the heroes of the faith. And you can see who I see, I think, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer on the left and Nelson Mandela, I think, on the right, or Desmond Tutu. I'm sorry. I can't. And knowing that we fall in this story among very sacred people of faith. So I handed out something, and for those of you on Zoom, there are extra copies, but I don't know about you, but I need a little help with my story. And so I found this affirmation, 100 affirmations and reminders about helpers, perhaps, on editing our story. So I hope that is helpful to you as we grow and move forward.